Today we're doing an overview of our systemsarchitect.io blog article, Cloud Compliance and Audit Readiness Checklist. Compliance is not the same as security, but it enforces a minimum standard that keeps organizations accountable. Preparing for an audit should not be a scramble that burns weeks of engineering time. When you build controls into the cloud architecture from day one, audit evidence generates itself continuously, and assessments like SOC2, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, or HIPAA become report exports instead of retrofits. This checklist covers 10 practices for audit ready environments on AWS, Azure, and GCP. 1. Map controls to frameworks. 2. Enable immutable audit logs. 3. Retain logs for required period. 4. Classify all data assets. 5. Track data residency. 6. Automate evidence collection. 7. Encrypt regulated workloads. 8. Conduct regular pen tests. 9. Maintain SBOM for all apps. 10. Review compliance monthly. First, map technical controls to each compliance framework you must meet. Why does mapping matter? Auditors grade against framework language, not your architecture diagrams. So without a mapping, your team spends every cycle translating Terraform, IAM, and monitoring into control speak. A living map lets you answer an access control request with the policy, screenshot, and review log that satisfy a specific control identifier. Start with the broadest framework, often SOC2 Type 2 or ISO 27001, then map others onto it, because encryption at rest can satisfy many frameworks at once. Keep the map in a spreadsheet or GRC tool and update it when controls or frameworks change. On AWS, Audit Manager ships frameworks for SOC2, PCI DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, and CIS and pulls evidence from Config, CloudTrail, and Security Hub. On Azure, Compliance Manager scores posture against hundreds of regulations and separates Microsoft managed from customer managed controls with exportable reports. On GCP, Assured Workloads and Security Command Center Premium map posture to CIS and other standards and support FedRAMP, CJIS, ITAR, and regional sovereignty guardrails. Second, enable immutable audit logs. Why make logs immutable? Attackers who gain admin rights will try to erase the trail. Write once logs stop deletion and alteration even by administrators. Frameworks require log integrity, and forensics without logs is guesswork. Store logs in a dedicated logging account or project. Apply worm policies, limit access to break glass admins, and verify immutability with a safe test delete that should fail. On AWS, an organization CloudTrail into S3 object lock compliance mode for multi-year retention blocks even root from early deletion. On Azure, immutable blob containers with time-based retention or legal hold enforce protection at the storage service. On GCP, set a cloud storage retention period and lock the policy so it cannot be shortened. Locking is irreversible, so verify first. Retain logs for the longest period any framework demands. PCI DSS wants a year with 3 months immediately available. HIPAA can mean 6 years for security documentation. SOC2 expects enough history for effective monitoring, often about a year. GDPR wants no longer than the purpose requires. Satisfy the strictest rule that applies. Then use tiered storage, about 90 days hot for queries and alerts, older data in cold archive with a catalog so you can still find a date range. Test retrieval quarterly, so archives are not theoretical. On AWS, Lifecycle CloudTrail from S3 Standard to Glacier Instant Retrieval and Deep Archive keep CloudWatch groups hot for about 90 days and query with Athena where needed. On Azure, extend log analytics, retention, and export longer history to hot, cool, and archive storage tiers. On GCP, custom logging buckets beyond the 30-day default, plus cloud storage lifecycle to nearline, cold line, and archive, and BigQuery for queryable long-term history. Fourth, classify all data assets. What does classification buy you? Sensitivity levels drive encryption, access, and retention. Without classification, you overprotect junk or underprotect regulated data. GDPR, PCI DSS, and HIPAA all assume you know where personal, cardholder, or health data lives. Use 4 levels: public, internal, confidential, and restricted. Tag storage, databases, and pipelines. Run automated discovery quarterly and after big migrations. On AWS, Macy scans S3 for PII, financial data, and credentials on a schedule and feeds Security Hub. On Azure, Microsoft Purview classifies across Azure and multi-cloud sources with hundreds of sensitive types and lineage views. On GCP, Cloud DLP inspects storage, BigQuery, and data store for many info types and reports into Security Command Center. Fifth, track data residency. Regulations restrict where personal data may be stored and processed. CDN caches, cross-region replicas, and log pipelines can create quiet violations and large fines. Constrain allowed regions at org or account level, diagram data origin, transit, and rest, and recheck when architectures change. On AWS, service control policies limit requested regions, remembering global services like IAM, CloudFront, and Route 53 still need careful design. On Azure, allowed locations policy, sovereign clouds where required, and service-specific residency docs, plus confidential computing for data in-use protection. On GCP, resource locations organization policy, assured workloads for stricter scopes, and VPC service controls so data cannot leave a perimeter even with valid IAM. Where is this info from? It is a condensed version of a complete article on blog.systemsarchitect.io. View that full blog article with more details on the site. Also check the video notes for links. Sixth, automate evidence collection. Why automate evidence? Manual screenshot hunts for SOC2 Type 2 can take 2 to 4 engineering weeks and are stale by review day. A daily or weekly pipeline should collect configuration snapshots, operational proof like access reviews and incident tests, and monitoring evidence stored read-only with timestamps and integrity hashes, each artifact mapped to a control. On AWS, Audit Manager continuously gathers config, CloudTrail, and Security Hub evidence into control folders you can export. On Azure, Compliance Manager plus Policy and Defender regulatory dashboards give continuous assessment against PCI DSS, SOC2, ISO, and NIST command. On GCP, Security Command Center, Premium, and Assured Workloads provide continuous assessment and API export of compliance findings into BigQuery for trends. Seventh, encrypt regulated workloads beyond default provider keys. Customer-managed keys, key access logging, dual control for sensitive key ops, and separation from non-regulated estates support PCI, HIPAA, and crypto shredding when you must render data unrecoverable. Dedicate keys per regulated scope, log every use, document procedures, and test shredding annually. On AWS, restrictive KMS key policies, CloudTrail on KMS, automatic rotation, optional cloud HSM, and compliance tags on keys. On Azure, Key Vault Premium or Managed HSM for higher FIPS levels, diagnostic logging, policy enforcement, and separate vaults per scope. On GCP, HSM-backed cloud KMS keys, CMEK on regulated resources, data access logs, and VPC service controls around the regulated perimeter. What do pen tests add? Checklists prove controls exist. Pen tests prove they survive real techniques, including cloud-specific paths like IAM escalation, metadata abuse, and serverless misuse. Run at least annually and after major architecture change. Mix automated scanners with manual depth and follow each provider's testing policy so you do not trigger abuse systems. On AWS, most of your own services can be tested without prior notice for allowed activities. Tools like PackU, Scout Suite, and Prowler help with findings tracked in Security Hub. On Azure, standard testing of your resources is generally allowed without prior approval. Avoid DDoS and social engineering of Microsoft staff and use Azure-focused enumeration tools. On GCP, test your own projects under the acceptable use policy and use multi-cloud auditors plus Security Command Center web scanning for common app issues. Ninth, maintain an SBOM for every application. What is an SBOM? A software bill of materials inventories components so a new CVE becomes a minutes-long database query instead of a weeks-long scavenger hunt. Federal expectations and PCI DSS 4.0 increasingly treat component inventory as required, not optional. Generate SBOMs in CI/CD using Cyclone DX or SPDX. Store them with artifacts. Attach cosign attestations to images and gate deploys so running containers have documented inventories. Sift and Grike generate and scan. AWS Inspector can export SBOMs for ECR and Lambda. Policy engines can require attestations before pods run. 10th, review compliance monthly. Controls drift, a temporary security group change, a service without standard encryption, an IAM role that grew during an incident. A 1-hour monthly review with security, platform, and app leads should cover score trends, new findings, remediation status, framework updates, and upcoming audits. A declining score is an architecture problem, not only a ticket queue. On AWS, Security Hub standards and Security Score give a single monthly metric and failed finding exports for history. On Azure, Defender Secure Score and regulatory dashboards, plus alerts on score drops, surface drift between reviews. On GCP, Security Command Center compliance views and BigQuery monthly aggregates with PubSub for critical findings between meetings. To close, map controls and automate evidence so audits become exports, not multi-week fire drills. Keep immutable logs with the strictest required retention and isolated worm storage so integrity holds across major frameworks at once. Classify data, enforce residency, and encrypt regulated workloads with customer-managed keys so you can always answer where sensitive data lives and how it is protected. Pen tests, SBOMs, and monthly reviews keep compliance continuous and effective against real attacks, not only theoretically checked boxes. Those 10 practices turn audit readiness into an everyday property of the cloud estate on AWS, Azure, and GCP. Well, that does it for now. Hope you got something out of this video. Find a lot more articles and guides on both systemsarchitect.io and codeguides.io. That's systemsarchitect.io and codeguides.io.